So, hello everybody. It's good to see all of you. And hello, David. And a very warm welcome to everybody to this evening's talk on Indigenous wisdom. And we have with us today Dr. David Fletcher. And he's an author, he's an educator, and a social justice advocate. So he has a lot of experience living amongst rural communities in Canada, India, and Africa. So he's been with the Brahma Kumaris for 20 years, and he draws on that experience, bringing a unique perspective on revitalizing Indigenous wisdom. And I'll just share a couple of things before we begin. So as you probably saw, the mics and videos are muted because we're recording. It is being live streamed on Facebook, so if you like, you can catch it later. And finally, please do, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and send them to the host, and then David can respond to them, hopefully later. So I'll hand you over to David. Thank you.
Great, Angela. Thank you very much. And very happy to be here. And I can't see people out there, but so glad that you were able to join for this little talk that's about a subject that's very dear to my heart. So I'm very happy to be able to share some of what's been shared with me over the years and pass it on to others who are interested. So I have developed a little set of PowerPoint slides that I'd like to share just to keep me on track. And let me start by saying thanks to the team in Manchester who's doing all the technical background and setting things up, and who chose the slide of this young woman with her caring gaze on the globe as the picture to advertise this session. I think it really captures a lot of what I've learned from Indigenous people and what's come to mean a lot to me. That caring for our Earth, this planet we call home. And I should just say, before we begin, that Indigenous can be understood in many, many different ways. The way I look at Indigenous people is that they are diverse groups of people from all across our planet. But maybe what makes them unique is they still traditionally live close to the land with nature, or aspire to continue to live close to the land with nature. And often they're talked about as the first inhabitants of an area that maybe in the present day have become a smaller minority group that has suffered from the exploitation of colonialism and various forms of discrimination, et cetera, for generations. Here in Canada, we talk about the 500 years of challenges that First Nations and other Aboriginal people have experienced. So that's part of the sense of Indigenous, but a lot of my own work has been with Indigenous people on the African continent who have a different set of colonial histories, et cetera. But also for me, what's really important is Indigenous people have a unique language, a unique way of living their lives, a philosophy, and very often a cosmology or an understanding of how the world works that's quite different than what we may have become used to in our Western mindsets. And a lot's been done, particularly, I would say, in the last 30 years of reviving Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous wisdom. So that's kind of the space that I come from. with some deep ancestry, both on the African continent and the South American continent, that I bring to my experience as well. But I took some guidance from a Buddhist scholar, Joanna Macy, who some of you may be familiar with, who talks about the great turning, the particular point we're at in the history of human civilization and what we can do to turn things around. And she talks about starting with gratitude. So that's what I wanted to do today, was start with gratitude. And I have a question for you. What are you grateful for at this time in your life? So I'd like us just to take a couple of minutes. We're not going to be able to interact, but for yourself, in your own reflection, just think for yourself, what are you grateful for at this time in your life? You may want to write something down if you have pencil and paper, or just in your own reflection, in your own mind, try to name, what are you grateful for at this time in your life? And as I was thinking about this question, a number of things came to mind, having access to fresh water and vegetables from the garden. I'm not a great gardener myself, but my partner is a very great gardener. I have a shelter. I have pretty good health and well-being. I'm very grateful for that. Natural areas that I can walk in and spend time in, an extended family that I'm connected with, interesting work that I can do, sort of a family of faith and a sense of being able to connect in some way to the divine. And maybe something we're all grateful for at this time is the opportunity to connect through Zoom rooms. I'm here in rural Canada, in Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada, and many of you are in Manchester or in other parts of the world, and we're able to connect through this medium and have a bit of an interaction. So that's a simple thing that I think it's important for us to be grateful for. But another piece of advice from dear Joanna Macy is we have to acknowledge the modern day issues that we're experiencing. And she has a catchphrase, I think, that's an important one to think of in that sense. And she says, don't be afraid of the dark. We need to start with gratitude, but we can't be afraid of the dark and some of the issues we're experiencing. So in that sense, I've also put a slide together. Many of us, I think, have conflicts on our mind these days from what's going on in the world. And there's other interesting things happening in our world that are taking resources, and people not being able to find a sustainable livelihood in their own place, so moving to other places where people there also have their struggles. There's the climate crisis that from an environmental perspective, and I think from a human perspective, is so key. Employment, particularly for people with disabilities, racism is an issue. Here in Canada with Indigenous people, there's a big issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. For elderly people and other people, certainly a situation of isolation and homelessness. And for many young people, there's that sense as well of being isolated and alone. Eco-anxiety, I mentioned, and various other mental illnesses that I think are becoming endemic and almost epidemic in many parts of the world. Rising food prices. I've heard from friends in the UK that that's a big issue, and I know it is here in Canada and has been for many people in many parts of the world for a long, long time. And of course, we've had our natural disasters, whether they're floods or fires or hurricanes or other things. And these are all issues that I think can cause us stress and strain and take away our peacefulness and our happiness in life. And what can we do about those things? How do we deal with those things that sometimes can be quite overwhelming? And again, in this model of Joanna Macy, and if you have a chance, it's something well worth looking into and reading. She talks about a couple of the steps are envisioning the future, having that picture in our minds of the situation we'd like to have in the future. And then she talks about rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. If we want to make a change, we have to do some things differently. And what I've found really inspiring from her work is she says, we need to do things in 3 different areas. One is holding actions where we might resist or try to slow down or stop the negative things we see happening in the world around us. But equally important, we need to express our creative energy and develop new patterns and new ways of working and new innovative ways to secure our food and our well-being and satisfying employment and creating new ways of life that we can exist in harmony on this planet. And that sense of creating something new is really important. But the third area that she talks about, I think, is the one most often neglected. And that's a shift in consciousness or a shift in values. And she talks about it as a scientific and spiritual revolution, where we see the sacred and new forms of spirituality. We learn from new science and from ancient wisdom. So that's kind of been my segue and my inspiration to look at ancient wisdom. And going back to the idea of starting from gratitude, I'm very, very thankful of the opportunities I've had over the last 30, 35 years to work alongside people and live and learn with different Indigenous people in different parts of the world. And I want to bring a few of those voices into our conversation today. First of all, from Mi'kma'ki, the land of the Mi'kmaq people here in rural Nova Scotia, where I'm currently living. Also from northern Ghana, where I've spent a lot of time on the African continent in the last many, many years. Excuse me. And also from Zambia, where I have some very close friends and have learned from people there as well. And then I also want to share some voices of wisdom from the Aboriginal people of Australia and the Maori people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, because in my studies and readings and watching films, etc., I've learned a lot from the wisdom of the Indigenous people of that area as well. So let's start by hearing some of these voices, and something I've learned, particularly from the people of Australia, etc., is the difficulties and challenges that have been experienced can trigger memories of more difficulties and can re-traumatize people. So we are going to hear voices of two elders, Indigenous elders from that part of the world, who have since passed on. But I'm sharing their voices out of great respect for what I've learned from them and what I think they can share, and you can learn from them as well. But just a trigger warning for people about that. And the first person to hear from is Dr. Ringa-Marie Taruki Rose Perry, a Maori elder who passed away in 2020. But I have a little clip here I'd like to share from her. Let me just make sure I have the sound on to share. And let's hope that our technology works for us.
We believe in the oneness of everything that exists. There is no separation for us. As far as we're concerned, we all come from the same source. And not only are we related as human beings, but we also relate to the progeny of Papatuanuku, Earth Mother, so that we are related to the birds, the fish, the trees, all the insects. And so when you came this afternoon, we gave you a formal welcome. We had a hongi, which was to press noses. My eyebrows remind you of the wingspan of the birds. My eyebrows remind you of the tail of the whale, and you know, my nose is the body. And my forehead is a crown, reminds you of the crown of the great trees. My nose is the trunk. And so when we touch the seeing eye or the healing eye, we link in and we remember that we are interrelated and that we are a part of the oneness of everything that exists. We do not believe in separation, no.
So I hope you were able to hear that that video and get a sense of the deep wisdom that's owned by Rose. And in this little clip, she talked a lot about interconnectedness and interrelatedness, and I think that's such an important thing for us to recognize. You know, this sense of oneness as a family of humanity, but beyond that, in terms of our interrelationship with other living beings, whether it's the whale or the trees or the other living beings that she mentioned. And this sense of, you know, some formality that I think has been lost in our lives in many ways, that when we greet people, when we interact with people, it's in that consciousness of oneness. And interestingly, she talked about, you know, the touching the healing eye when we greet, that eye where we're able to see things that maybe we can't see with our other two eyes, but it's about relation and connection with other people. So this is one of the issues that I've learned about that I think is really, really powerful from Indigenous people. And you hear different things in different ways from many Indigenous people around the world, but this is one of the things that I found is very common, almost universal, the respect and cooperation that we need to have with all parts of the human world tree, with other living beings, you know, have that sense of interaction and interconnected with everyone who's going through their life journey, whatever that journey might be. This woman was an educator, and in her educational framework, she talked about spirit, body, and mind are things we need to learn about and we need to study. But she also talked a lot about our extended family. And for myself, growing up in Canada, and I know many people in the Western world, to go from the nuclear family of mom, dad, and kids to an extended family of maybe grandparents and cousins is a big step. But in her sense, the extended family was the family of all of creation. So seeing, other living beings, whether they're animals or birds or the elements themselves, as part of our family, part of creation. And that's kind of a shift in consciousness, I think, that can be a very powerful thing. From Australia, I want to go to Ghana, where I spent a lot of time, and my senior brother, a good friend, Bernard Gurry, who has established an organization called the Center for Indigenous Knowledge and Organizational Development, and also have learned many lessons from his Indigenous wisdom. And here's just one short clip from him.
Yeah, in fact, women, about 80% of our food production is done by women. And not just producing, but processing, storage, and all that stuff. And even selection and management of seed is usually done by the woman. And so in our case, in the case of SICOT, we're working with the Peasant Farmers Association, which is the umbrella association of all peasant farmers in Ghana. But specifically, we're working with women farmers. For example, we have a project with CODI and the University for Development Studies, where we are empowering women in food production and economic development. And actually, right now, we have a project. We just did a training program to look at how they can develop a seed chain in such a way that they select seeds that give the values that matter to them. For example, seeds that will produce food, but seed at the same time they can use for other cultural things, as against the seeds that might come from outside, which is an ongoing project that we're doing now. So our emphasis is particularly working with women, even within the context of the whole peasant farmers in Ghana.
So Bern speaks very practically, I think, about what I've named as responsible actions. And he talks about the very special roles that women play around food production and processing, etc. But the part that really strikes me about this particular clip is the importance of seeds. And in an agricultural community, the importance of the women for selecting and managing the seeds, because that's what will give their communities a future. And empowering women to be able to maintain that role, and to realize that they will make choices for the seeds, not just for the food they'll produce, but for the cultural values they have as well, the ceremonies, the taste of the food for special occasions, the way that the seeds are resistant to certain climatic conditions, but are also very important for marriages and funerals and other celebrations. So that whole sense of the special actions that women take and the responsibilities they take on in their community is so essential to what I've learned from Bern and others from the Dagara cosmology. And I had the opportunity to learn a lot in that area around the idea of resilience. And they talk about resilience as Kanyir, a combination of courage and patience. But they also have this phrase, lib fomanga. And lib fomanga is if you want to take care of difficulties, you first need to change yourself. And I think this is such a deep belief, almost, a moral imperative in the Dagara culture, that you need to take the right actions for yourself and your community, or you will suffer the consequences. And it's very similar to those of us who've been exposed to Eastern religions about the law of karma. It's a very similar understanding from the Dagara people in northern Ghana. the responsibility to protect seeds and the essence of the seeds, the responsibility to discern and decide that the women take on is so important, because they are custodians, not just of the physical seeds, but custodians of the culture, and are the ones that often transmit the culture to future generations, etc. So how do we maintain that consciousness in our minds to think about taking the right actions for ourselves, but also for passing on our values to the next generation? And the next clip I want to share here is from a friend in the Mi'kmaq community, grandmother Doreen Bernard, who's a water protector, who I've had the honor to walk with on a water walk. And let's hear the voice of this Indigenous elder.
We honor and respect the water as our first medicine. All life needs clean water to live. When we are in the womb, we are in the water, and we are able to breathe the water, and the water nourishes our body and protects us. With that gift comes a responsibility to protect the water. When our water is not clean, our plants, our medicines, our food, everything is affected. We need water for all life. All life, all these plants, our food, our medicines can't grow without water. We always give thanks to the water. The water is first. Water is life.
So for me, this sharing about water is related to respect for the water and what it brings us, but also to healing. I mentioned walking with Doreen, and she does a walk at least once a year, often of 500 or 600 kilometers, along different waterways that need to be protected, that need to be respected, and offers prayers to every body of water she encounters along the way. And that's what she feels is her responsibility, and will make a difference in the way the water is treated and the relationship between herself and her people in the water. It's very interesting to talk about water as first medicine. It nourishes and protects us. It helps plants grow, it provides medicine, it provides food, and all those things need clean water also to survive. And that we do have to think about the responsibility we have to water, and how we're a trustee of that water, and how we need to give thanks for what water does for us, as it takes care of our body, as we take care of it and the elements. And that, to think about water, any of you have had an experience with toxins of some kind in your body, the first thing they tell you to do is drink lots of water, right? It is a natural medicine for healing and flushing out toxins. And I think that experience of flushing things out can also be a metaphor for how we can cleanse some of the collective trauma we might have in our bodies. That healing experience we learn from water is a healing experience that I think is needed in the collective consciousness of all human beings. And we need to flush those things out and move through those things to learn from them and move on to something else. So healing is a very important element of the Indigenous wisdom that I've been exposed to. So another little question for you, and that is to ask yourself, what actions are you taking for healing? Healing of your body, mind, and spirit? healing of your relationships with other living beings, and healing for your relationships with the elements. I think this is a question that Indigenous elders would want us to consider. And maybe after this talk, you'll revisit some of these questions and think about them in more detail. Because I do have a few other things I'd like to share. This particular one is the voices of two artists from Zambia who do a lot of their work with the Bembe people. And let's listen to what they have to say.
When couples communicate, it creates a beautiful world. It encourages the couple to communicate to each other well. So, Lloyd, Lawrence, yes. Now we'll blow together.
Together, there was no sound. Because you know, this one is talking, this one, so in terms of understanding. So when I'm speaking, she must keep quiet so that she can listen and understand. Then she can give a view. When she's speaking, I must also keep quiet. Then that way, otherwise there will be no communication. No one will hear anything and so on. So it's about communication in a home. Yeah, the respect.
So for me, the wisdom in this is not just about speaking and listening and communication, but it's about peace and harmony and how we get peace and harmony in our lives. And it needs to start with respectful communication. And it needs to start with being quiet. Good communication will never happen if we're not quiet, and listen to others and try to understand them. And then the speaking and listening needs to go back and forth. I was also inspired by these artists. The painting you would have seen behind them talks about the traditional marriage teachings in Bemba culture. And, you know, there's so many lessons wrapped up in this, and it's a whole sort of ritual that's designed for these marriage teachings, a rite of passage almost, where they learn about the importance of both men and women, of courage and tolerance and accommodation, and when to withdraw and when to step forward in a discussion in your family and your community. And it really is about, you know, maturing yourself as a human being and how you find a way to harmonize personalities between people. And I think it's very wise, those kinds of learnings that so often in our formal education systems, young people aren't given the opportunity to learn those kinds of things. They're spending too much time on their phones or other technology learning other kinds of coding rather than the coding for good communication between human beings. But this also reminds me of a good friend of mine, Sagai, who has now passed, who talked about when he was quite old, and so his parents were elderly at the time. There was a major conflict they were having with each other and were quite bitter with each other. And both of his parents at different times told Sagai their side of the story and kind of wanted him to get involved and take sides against the other parent. And of course, that was very difficult for him to do, but he didn't know how to intervene. So he sat with them and listened. And he sat with them and listened. And he sat with them and listened. He talked about for a couple of years, every time he saw his mother and father, they were just venting about the other one, and it was quite vindictive. But because he spent the time with them and showed he cared for both of them, that gradually the stories they were sharing got less and less angry. The stories they were sharing had less and less power and energy in them. And eventually they came to a place where they were able to talk to each other. And all that he had offered to the situation was some silence and some listening. But often that's the most powerful thing that can help us harmonize our personalities or harmonize the habits we may have acquired from our past in this lifetime, or if you believe even from other lifetimes where we may have picked up some habits. So that wisdom about peace and harmony and communication is really important. Dr. Albert Marshall is I don't know, you can call him a senior elder, but he's a very well-known, wise elder here in the Mi'kmaq community. And I have a short clip from him I'd like to share as well.
In English, it means that to be mindful of maintaining that interconnection, interdependency with all of creation. We have to do it on a daily ritual basis. And let's use the word prayer. We use that format of not just acknowledging, but expressing our appreciation to what she has given us. And also to remind ourselves as to what our responsibilities are of ensuring that during our little short stay here in this physical plane, we have to find a way and be mindful as to how we go about exercising our inherent responsibilities of ensuring that no action that we will take will ever compromise the ecological integrity of the area, nor compromise the cleansing capacity of the system. Because our overall objective is to ensure that the next 7 generations will also have the same opportunities as we have, and hopefully better opportunities than we have, of not just being able to sustain themselves and harvest the gifts from the Creator, but also be able to enjoy and learn from her, just like what our ancestors have learned from her.
So I'm sure you picked up some wisdom. Certain things may have resonated you from what Albert was saying, but for me, there's a couple of things. One is this sense of interdependence and reciprocity. He talked about being mindful of our interdependence with all of creation. Similar in many ways to what Rose Perry was saying earlier on from the Maori woman from New Zealand. He talks about the power of daily ritual and prayer, and again, that sense, like Joanna Macy, of starting from gratitude, expressing our appreciation to the world around us, but not forgetting the responsibilities we have. That's so important. And like I mentioned, Burnguri for the Dagara people in Ghana, that sense of the responsible actions, the actions we need to take as human beings with our fellow human beings, with nature, is so important because we are interdependent, and we need to have that reciprocal mutual relationship back and forth with each other. Very often it's astronauts who have gone into space to the moon and looked back on our beautiful blue planet, they call it, floating in space, and realizing that we only have this planet and we need to cooperate and collaborate with each other. We need to mark with ceremonies the gifts, the offerings that we've received and we're willing to give to others and to the world. We need to recognize that none of the plants are going to grow if we don't have bees to pollinate them. And we can look at things on that very practical level. But when we do, we need to change our consciousness as well and shift our relationship that we have with others and with nature to become the stewards of the earth and to realize we have some responsibility to serve the whole tree of humanity and all of life. And that sense of interdependence and reciprocity is so important. But I think Albert also talked about this idea of a deep time perspective. He talked about our short stay on this physical plane, and that we need to ensure the opportunities that we have 7 generations have into the future, our great, 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 I think one more, great grandchildren, you know, having that long range into the future. It's just not about us in the here and now, and that we can learn not just from what's trendy in the media or the latest university course, but we can learn from the experience of our ancestors and going back into the past 7 multiple generations as well. But that at this time, we have a real responsibility to ensure future generations, like Albert said, can sustain, enjoy, and learn from all of creation that's around them. And one of the things that struck me is from the Mi'kmaq creation story, they talk about, we came from the stars and we will go back to the stars. But at this time on the earth, we have a very significant role to play. And if you have that perspective of maybe living multiple births at different times, it's a very similar understanding how what's happening now might be small and limited in terms of time and the number of people we're able to influence, but it's very, very significant, the role we're playing at this time. And we need to honor that and do it to the best of our ability. You know, I often think of, when I think of time, I think of the infinity sign, you know, and it's a circle, it's a figure 8, but it has no beginning and no end. And that's what time is. That's what eternity is. And we need to think about time in that way, of cycles that are much bigger than ourselves in this moment with our nuclear family and our immediate needs or issues in front of us right now. So that was some of my learning from Albert, and I'm looking at the time here, but I think it's really important that we just have a couple minutes to listen to Uncle Max, as he's known, who also passed away in 2021, an Australian elder, who shares something else that I think is important for all of us.
You see, Aboriginal people haven't got credibility in this country. It's zilch. It's appalling. If we said that place was sacred over there, you know, across the river. If I sat there and I was telling a lot of politicians, or something, you can't develop over there because that place is sacred over there. And the first thing that they would do, then they would go and they would look to see what was sacred about it, or they would try and bring the sacredness down. You know, and they say, well, so what's sacred about it? You know, but they can't understand the energy or the ceremonies that went into the land, and the singing that went into the land, into the rocks, into the trees. They cannot understand that, and so they got to look to find to identify something there. They're trying to look for that sacredness. See, you can't see sacredness. You can't see spirituality, but you can feel it, you can live it, and you can have it. and that's the same as sacredness, and people just can't understand that, you know.
So I think this is such an important shift in consciousness that we need to consider, and similar things are said by many Indigenous people that I've had the honor to encounter over the years. You know, we need to have this sacred relationship with place, but also this understanding that our relationship with the place is not just a material relationship, but there's energy that we exchange with the place, you know, metaphysical energy. He talked about ceremony of singing that went into the land and the rocks and the trees. You know, you can't see the sacredness. There's all kinds of energies at play in the world that make our existence here sacred, even though we can't see them. They can't be counted. They can't be monetized, but they are still something important in our lives. And I think we need to open up our consciousness to appreciating that, because I've certainly had the experiences where I can feel those things and where I've been able to live in a way that's a little more sacred and have some sacredness. Some of you on this call may have met Daddy Janki, one of the leaders of the Brahma Kumaris, who has since left her body. But I remember the first time I met her, this little lady in a room full of people, she said, "Come on in and sit down. You're going to be really happy when you leave this room 45 minutes from now." And it was like, what's she going to do to make us happy? And she just sat there and talked. I have no idea what she said or what she talked about. But at the end of that 45 minutes, there was almost this effervescent bubbling over of happiness because of the energy she brought into the room and how she was able to change the atmosphere in the room into a more spiritual energy. And I think that metaphysical energy is real, and we have to recognize that it's at play in our lives, and it makes everything in our lives sacred, and all places that we encounter in our lives sacred. You know, there is wonder in the world that we need to appreciate. And we need, in terms of thinking about belonging, that yes, we belong to a kinship group and a language group and whatever, and that's really important. But we also belong to the land and nature and the other living beings that are around us. And we need to recognize that we also belong in some ways to this metaphysical energy and the divine source, the supreme, that's also a form of energy like that. So lots to think about, but I think it's so important in our consciousness, and I think we can learn from many Indigenous people that that's a way that they have lived their lives for generations, and they want the opportunity to continue living their lives in this way. So a last little question for you. Consider that you may have lived many lifetimes, and think about what gifts you carry with you that may have been brought forward from those other times. What are you ready to offer for the future? And who, what, or where pulls your sense of belonging? You might want to take a picture of that slide, or the slides will be available to share. But 3 questions, I think, again, that our Indigenous elders would be honored to know that you were considering those to take them forward. So just by way of conclusion, you know, summary, the lessons from Indigenous wisdom: to think about interconnections, responsible actions, the power of healing, the power of peace and harmony, reciprocity and interdependence, this deep time perspective that's so important, and the idea of sacred belonging. I think those are 7 really important lessons that we need to keep in mind from the Indigenous, just a few lessons from Indigenous people from different corners of the world. And it's interesting for me, you know, as I was just thinking about how am I going to put these things together as 7 points, this idea came forward of the interlocking circles, which I know are important in many different traditions. It's talked about as sacred geometry, and they talk about it as the seed of life. So maybe some of these lessons from Indigenous people are one of the seeds, or part of the seed that can give us life into the future. For people who are interested in learning more about these individuals, etc., I've put references here, and I'll send the PowerPoint on to others. But I wanted to end with just a short meditative experience, just for 3 minutes or so, and then I'll take some questions. So I'll ask you just to get comfortable and to take a moment and contemplate and reflect on the voices we've heard in the past 40 minutes or so. Let's think about the Indigenous wisdom that was shared and what touched our hearts and minds. And let's consider, how can we use this wisdom to deal with some of the modern issues that impact us daily? Issues that impact us directly, and issues we see being experienced by others in our global family and by the earth itself. So take a deep breath and slow down. Slow down your breathing and slow down your thoughts. And focus your mind on the Indigenous wisdom that has been shared. Begin with considering interconnections and interdependencies. Give thanks for the relationships and connections that have nurtured you on your life journey, including the relationships with places, with nature, with the elements, and other living beings that have sustained and nurtured you in various ways. Recognize you have a special, unique role to play in this world drama. And recognize you are responsible for your own actions. But value the power you have to discern and decide the actions that you will take that will be the seeds for your future peace and happiness. Consider yourself as a peaceful, loving soul, a soul who may also need some healing from experiences of the past. And imagine a cool, fresh stream of water, and how that water is medicine, and the stream can cleanse you and satisfy your thirst for pure energy. Commit to protecting the purity of that water so it can nurture you and others in the future. And be willing to enter the sweet territory of silence. Be willing to listen to others, to understand and improve communication, and be willing to listen to the voice of nature or the voice of the Supreme that may also have guidance for you. Be mindful of your interdependence with all of creation, and consider your daily practice of ceremony or prayer to give thanks to that creation. And consider the short time you have in your current body as compared to all of existence. And consider yourself an eternal soul who benefits and can heal from the legacy of the past, and who can contribute to the well-being of others and the planet for 7 generations into the future. And now, as you feel nurtured by this Indigenous wisdom, take a couple of deep breaths. Breathe in the positive energy. And when you are ready, return to the here and now, knowing you have access to this powerful wisdom and energy whenever you need it in your life. Om Shanti. And my apologies for going a little bit over time. I see there's a couple of chat messages, but I'm very happy to answer any questions or hear comments from you of your experience with Indigenous knowledge as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very refreshing talk. We do have some questions for you. And the first question is, did you encounter any collaboration between Indigenous peoples and scientists, ecologists, or environmental activists from other cultures during your time with them? And also the second part, do Indigenous young people see a future within their community, or do they feel part of other global cultures as well?
So yes and yes. Lots of collaboration is going on. I know, for example, in my work in northern Ghana, there's a lot of work being done with universities. A university in the Netherlands, for example, is supporting their work, which is all about revitalizing Indigenous knowledge, different ways of enhancing food security and protecting the environment, etc. So lots of collaborations going on. Here in Canada, Doreen Bernard, who I mentioned, the grandmother water walker, has also been working to stop fracking and the exploitation of natural gas in an area. And there's been a broad coalition of scientists and activists and environmentalists and others rallying around her and the Mi'kmaq community and making a difference. So lots happening there. And it's really hard to talk about Indigenous young people in communities because there are so many communities. Indigenous people are so diverse. across the planet. But in my experiences, you know, the people that I've been interacting with are, particularly in the last 30 years, I think, have gone through a major revitalization and revalorization of their own cultural identity, indigenous knowledge, etc. And they see a great future for themselves in moving forward. Yes, there are struggles. Yes, there are difficulties. But compared to maybe some of the hopelessness and lack of respect that people were experiencing decades ago, there are more opportunities today, certainly my experiences here in Canada, where there is some understanding and appreciation by others to learn about Indigenous knowledge. And I think that provides hope for people.
Thank you. And we have another question for you. Lifestyles today take away the sacredness, togetherness, and sense of belonging. How do we bring that back?
I think it's very true that lifestyles and the momentum of the modern world take those things away. But I think each of us has the power to bring those things back in. You know, I know for myself, there was a time in my life where I was probably complaining and upset that there was no sacredness around food and where food came from. But I never offered grace. I never had a prayer before a meal. Or if I did, it wasn't done with a real sense of understanding or gratitude or thankfulness. So I've been able to bring that sort of thing back into my life. And I think there's lots of opportunities in our lives where in a small way, we can bring sacredness back into our relationships. It's not going to change it for other people. It's not going to change things for the whole world. But step by step, if we do it, and it influences someone else to do it, and they have a community gathering in their community where 30 people get together and they do it, slowly, I think that sacredness can come back in. And it begins with the change in our consciousness and then taking responsibility for our own actions to make a difference.
Thank you. We have a comment which is beautiful lessons. Thank you. Beautifully presented. And can I ask if you could share your blessings with us?
I'd be very happy to if we have time.
Yes.
Let's just share my screen again. And these are our blessings from, you know, that metaphysical energy that's out there. They're not my blessings, but they are a gift of Indigenous wisdom, a gift from nature. And everyone who's still on the call, if you can choose one of those cards, A, B, C, D, E, and that will be your special blessing for today. So if you chose D, it's the hummingbird. A hummingbird has crossed your path, and the message of the hummingbird is embrace what makes you happy, be joyful, count your blessings, and open yourself to pleasure. So people who chose D, that's what you got. And I'm sure there's lots of others that are saying, oh, I wish I had chosen D. But if you chose B, it's the beaver, very popular in the Canadian context. If the beaver has crossed your path, it's a message about making today count. Build towards manifesting your dreams and goals. So also a powerful message. And if you chose B, it's from the sugar maple tree, the standing people. Many Aboriginal people, Indigenous people talk about trees as standing people. And they also have messages for us, or can be metaphors with messages. And the sugar maple message is introduce versatility in your life. Stand out as a unique individual. Change is sweet. And if you chose A, it's the silver birch. Cleanse your body and spirit to find peace and health. Meditate with me. So for many Indigenous people, they talk about a grove of birch trees is a very powerful place for meditation. And for those who chose C, it's the message of the bear. The message of the bear is to go within. Personal strength comes from inner knowing. So that's a special blessing for those of you who chose the bear. And yeah, thank you for letting us have the time to share those things. From Jamie Sams is a woman who developed the animal cards, and it's actually a woman from the UK, Jane Struthers, I think. They're on the reference list, who looked at the meaning from the different tree traditions. So blessings for all of you. Thank you.
And thank you so much, David, for a very refreshing, enlightening talk, and lots of information there. And I liked the interconnectedness that was spoken about. And I tend to see it as a human race, that we're like jigsaw pieces.
Mm.
And we're so inextricably linked in that way. And so that is very beautiful. Thank you. So great big thank you to David, and also to everyone that's joined us this evening. I'm sure you've enjoyed it and found it enlightening in whatever way is pertinent for yourself.